So when I deal with agents and sellers, I see a pretty common mistake, both of them, almost universally, with agents and sellers for the most part. Agents, they let these things go. Sellers, they just don't realize, some of the prep time that they might want to do to have a maximum priced offer on their property. And the result on both of these mistakes could be, hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost revenue. And I thought we'd take some time and talk about those two mistakes because they're very much universal. I see them all the time. Your first mistake, simply not raising the rent. And we'll talk about that. Mistake number two that I see, not separating what's called capital expenses from your operating expenses. And we'll go into detail on that too. I actually have a handwritten profit and loss that I put notes on that resulted in a cash offer close in 30 days on one of our properties. And I'll show you how if I had not done that, the different value that property might have had if we had not pulled out the capital expenses from the operating expenses. So first, let's talk about rent. Now, an owner will tell you, I don't want to deal with the vacancy. I don't want to deal with finding a new tenant. What if I find a bad tenant? How do I know they're not going to tear up my property? The one in there is fine, or the ones in there are fine. I might be getting a little bit less rent, but hey, they're not tearing the property up. If I do raise the rent, maybe they'll leave. And they might. They might leave. And sometimes that's a good thing. I'm going to lose a full month's rent on one unit just to raise it a couple bucks. That's not really worth it to me. And so that makes sense for someone who's going to keep a property over a long period of time. Maybe they're in retirement age and they don't want to deal with the hassle. But the bottom line is your expenses as an owner will go up over time, even if your rents remain static. So, the cost of labor, cost of materials, utilities, your taxes may remain pretty static, if you're not selling it. But most of the other stuff will start to creep up over time. And if your rent remains the same, your net income is going to go down, which, number two, your property value is directly almost one-to-one tied to your net income. And I'll show you how that works. So you kind of got a double problem there, where your expenses will creep up, which reduces your net income, and you've got a lost opportunity for higher rent if you're not raising your rent. So you've got kind of a double hit on the value of your property. So if you go to sell it, agents, number one, they don't think about talking about this with their owners. And it could be a couple months. Maybe they want to reposition the property a little bit and do some changes. When you take on a listing as a residential agent, you've got a list of things that you want the owner to do to make it more appealing. Same thing in apartments. Here's an example. So what if I either kept the rent the same or I raised it every year for 5 years, just $20 a month? So the one thing, someone might, if you're way below market, if you're like here after 5 years, if you're $100 below market and you try to bring the property up to market, yes, you're going to have a lot of vacancy. But a renter's going to be a lot less motivated to move out over $20 a month, especially if they're trained that this is going to happen every year. And we can talk about that in a different video on the strategies that an owner might want to use. But $20 a month for 5 years. Okay, so after 5 years, you've now got an extra $100 a month coming in, or a whopping $1,200 per year on one unit. And your owner might tell you, look, if I didn't increase the rent, maybe I would probably have a couple vacancies over 5 years. And that's more than $1,200. I'm kind of net zero on this thing. What's the point of raising the rent? Well, what's the value of that $1,200 a year? Because that's going to your net income largely. And just to keep it simple, let's run this number. So for one unit, you're making an extra $1,200 a year. At a 5% return, that means the value of that one unit, if you raise the rent every year for just 15, 20 bucks, in this example, it's a $24,000 value per unit. So what that means is if you had 10 units where you were just keeping things flat, number one, your expenses are going to creep up too. But at that value, you lost over $200,000 in value by keeping the rents the same. And so this is a conversation an agent should have with an owner, because the owner might be able to make some changes, or they may be okay with offering it as is, and then you can offer this value add opportunity by increasing the rents after close. Okay. So that's number one. Okay, part two. So number one, raise your rents. It's a good idea for a lot of different reasons. Number two, this is a big mistake that I see agents make, and this can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in value to the owner. They get the profit and loss, and they don't pull out the capital expenses. So if you're not familiar, capital expenses are big ticket items that don't occur annually. So this could be replacing roofs, big HVAC replacement project. Maybe you redo all of the landscaping entirely. Now, these are big ticket items that are not annual. So here's a couple examples, new roof, HVAC, maybe you repaint the whole property, seal strip the parking lot. These are not annual operations. Okay. So if I say I've got $20,000, $30,000 replacing a roof that came out of my profit and loss last year, I can actually remove that from the P&L, because if I leave that in, I've now got a $20,000 less in income. And we just saw how much $1,200 can change the value of a property. So it's very important that you pull out the capital expenses. And most of the time, an owner, especially if they're savvy, will be able to break that out. The savvy ones will. They'll have an above and a below the line expenses. So you can see the operational versus the capital. But smaller owners, 50 units or less, they're usually not going to do that. They'll usually have it all kind of baked into one. And the goal as a business owner is to report as little operational income as is allowed, right? I don't want to pay taxes on a whole bunch of money. I want to pay taxes on the least amount possible as allowed by the law. So yes, I'm going to write off that new roof. That's part of the expenses that year. Okay. Maybe I report a loss because I did all these capital expenses, but as someone selling it, you want to make sure you pull those out. So that's going to, in that thought process, you're going to go to them and you're going to have some questions. You're not just going to take the profit and loss, apply it to a marketing package, and then sell it based on that income, because then you're going to cost them a lot of money. Operating expenses, examples, utilities, water, sewer, trash, house electric, you've got annual, just regular repairs like a broken window, clogged sink, stuff like that. See? So hopefully you can see the difference between those two. And so let's do this. I'm going to show you a P&L we pulled up. I like this because this resulted in a cash offer, close in 30 days at our asking price. And so this is the P&L that I received, and you can see my actual notes. This is what we gave to them. So we just didn't have enough time to digitize this or separate it out with the bookkeeper. But you can see here I highlighted stuff that I thought was odd. Here's a $4,000 charge when usually it's zero. Okay, $2,000, $1,000, $3,000, $2,000. What was that? Oh, they were doing repainting of big giant swaths of the building, right? So this is not stuff, if you're not going to repaint the building every year. This was a capital expense that they had saved up for. Same thing with roof. They did a roof replacement here. Okay, I think it was just a shingle. So you can see here, I broke them all out. I asked the questions for this whole year on anything that looked odd. I found out any capital expenses that the owner had. And then you can see here, in my beautiful handwriting, I broke it all down. So it's clear to someone looking at it what the real NOI is and what the capital expenses were. So if you look at the bottom right here, we looked at all of those different expenses, added them up, and that totaled $36,000. Now, if we pull that out of the operating or the normal expenses, originally there was $81,000, but if we pull the capital expenses out, the real operating expenses per year was only $45,000, which ended up within the range that we usually want to see for a healthy building. And then we came over here and we threw it all together, including updated taxes, obviously, right? So his taxes were way lower. So you'll notice, though the net income is not as big of a difference as this $36,000, it's because the taxes are appropriately adjusted as well. So there you can see, that's the difference between those two. We very simply did that by hand. I would have added that into a digitized version of it, but we just didn't have time. Someone offered on it right away. Now check this out. My revised NOI was at $90,000. The one he provided was at $76,000. That's a difference of almost $14,000. So the value of that difference. And it was actually more because we sold it at a 3.14 cap rate. So the value was like $500,000 in the difference in value because we pulled the capital expenses out. So be aware of that. Owners aren't usually going to do that. They may not know that they should be doing that when they go to sell. So we often find agents, when they offer property up for sale, they haven't done that, and there's a huge benefit to our client who will buy it at whatever their asking price was. So he can go in there and make a lot more money than they reported on there. So hopefully this helps. Those are the pretty much universal mistakes that I see almost all the time with both owners and agents. The agents on the side of really not doing their homework, owners on the side of, they might have their reasons for not raising the rent. They might have their reasons for adding in the capital expenses with their profit and loss. But you really want to pull those out because you could be costing your guy $250,000, $500,000 in price point. So hopefully that helps. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Thanks.
If this training has been helpful for you at all, I highly suggest you join us at straichttalkacademy.com. We have a membership site. This has 50 plus hours of commercial real estate training videos. We have all these toolkits and templates and tools, marketing materials, everything that we use in our commercial brokerage ourselves, we offer to our members. There's a private group just for our members to ask questions, troubleshoot problems. If you have a problem with a letter of intent or a client, we're on there. We're talking monthly. We have professional interviews with different industry professionals that have all kinds of tools and different ways to help your clients. And we also have live office hours where you can join us live and ask us questions. So it's a great way to have some support in commercial real estate. If you're an agent looking to break into commercial real estate, I would really suggest you go over there. It's a monthly fee. It's not that much, and there's a lot of benefit to it. Thanks.